In this video, I'm going to show you item completion within a Moodle site. Item completion is a setting that records whether or not a student has met a certain completion criteria for any given item that you have placed inside of Moodle. That information can then be used in a lot of different ways. One of those is that students can determine to what extent they have completed various things inside your Moodle site, or have at least met the completion requirements. And in a moment, I'll show you what some of the limitations to that are. But the check mark appears in the box to the side of their name if they have met the requirement. They have completed the item. In addition, as instructor, over here under reports and under activity completion, you can see a table that shows you all of the items inside your course that have completion tracking, and then all of your students, which allows you to very quickly glance and see, has everybody done the things that they need to be doing? In addition to using completion tracking as a way to keep track of completion, it can also be used within the restrictions setting for any given item. So what I mean by that is, let's say I did not want the student, let me find a quiz in here. Oh, they're going to be a little further down because this is a reverse chronological order. Here we go. Let's say I did not want the students to be able to take this quiz until they had read two of these. Let's say there were two things here that were absolutely critical before they took the quiz, or maybe I wanted them to have gone through every single thing here before they took the quiz. In order for that to happen, first I need to set what means completion inside of each of these things, and then I need to tell the quiz it can only be made available if the students have met what I've set for completion. So what do I mean by that? I'm going to turn my editing back on now. It's going to clutter things up a bit, but it will make it easier for me to show you what I'm talking about here. And then I'm going to come back to this section with this quiz, or this one. Yeah, we'll do this one. This one's easy enough. Okay, so this is a link. So I'm going to come here. It's actually not a link. It's a page where I've given some description, and then there's a link out. But I'm just going to go to Edit Settings. And what needs to happen is that the student needs to have gone into this page. And the assumption is that they've clicked on the link and read. That doesn't mean that they have, but every item, now that we've turned on item completion for the entire site, now has an item completion settings. So because in this particular case, the activity's already been marked, so I need to unlock. It's just warning you before you make a change that might affect students. So completion tracking, show activities complete when conditions are met, or you can say, no, on this particular one, I don't want to do activity completion. That makes sense for things like labels or which you can use as headings and subheadings, stuff like that, where it would not make any sense to have activity completion because it's visible on the main page. It would always be marked as complete. You can have a scenario where students have to manually mark that they have completed something, or conditions are met. In this case, the only option we have is students must view this activity to complete it. So I checked that mark, and then I head back into the course site. And I can do that for a lot of things. Here on this quiz, now in a minute I'm going to show you how to make the quiz visible if you've done this, but what if instead you wanted students not to be able to move on to some other material until they have taken the quiz? There's also completion settings for things like quizzes. And you have a few more options here under activity completion. For example, it's not just, in this case, I have students can mark them manually, but I'm going to say show activity is complete. You could have it just view. If you just view this quiz, that does it. Or maybe instead, I want them to have received a grade, so I needed to have graded it. Or maybe I want them to have, they have to have a passing grade before they can move on to the next set of materials for the class. Now in this case, I'll need to set what a passing grade is in the quiz itself. Up here, grade to pass. So if this were a mastery-based model of using quizzes, let's say I need them to have an 80, and that's a grade to pass. And so now I'm requiring a passing grade. And then maybe my next topic block, I'm going to control its visibility until they have reached a passing grade on this topic area. Something like that. There's a whole wide variety of things that you can do here with completion tracking and what actually constitutes activity completion. But for quizzes, anything that has a grade associated, you have more options than just viewing it. But for files and folders and URLs and pages, things like that inside of Moodle, your only option is students must view this activity to complete it. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. So that's the limitation to the completion tracking, because we don't know if a student is actually going to read this item. We don't know. Like this, there's a better chance here because this is a PDF rather than a link, which means Moodle is recording the fact that they have at least clicked open the PDF, as opposed to here where they've just gone into this page. But we still don't know for sure if they've clicked on that link to get to the actual item. Not sure. You have to kind of explain to your students what the expectations are here, and this just gives you a rough way to control movement forward. It's in this particular case, if I want to limit access to this quiz until they have read this article, all I'm doing is re-emphasizing that point to them through the Moodle tool, in addition to my telling them verbally, hey, by the way, you need to read this article before you take the quiz. Otherwise, they're not wasting everyone's time by trying to take a quiz. That is the purpose of this particular quiz, is for them to see if they got the pertinent points out of the readings. There's not much point in that if they haven't been inside of any of the readings. Okay, so how do I limit access to this quiz based on whether or not they have read this article? Go back into the settings for this, and we'll go to the restrictions. So restrict access, I can add a restriction, and one of those is going to be activity completion. So now I want to say which activity has to have been met. Now this can be a pain because there's just this big fat list of things. They do tend to be in order, and as a result, as long as you are very familiar with your course, you can find the order pretty quickly. There we go. There it is. Okay. And then must be marked complete, must have a pass grade. So this particular thing, because this is a universal tool for all items in Moodle, these don't make any sense, this grade part here, because you can't have a grade. All you can do is marked complete in this case. So now when I save and display, obviously that quiz is visible. And because I have got a check mark, my quiz will be visible when I come down here. There we go. Now, at the moment, the way I have it set, it's letting me know you can't get into this quiz unless you've done this. That's a good suggestion to leave that up for this kind of use of the activity completion, because it just reminds the student why they can't. It reminds them that a quiz exists, but it tells them they really can't get into it until they've been to this. Now this is an active link here, so they don't even have to come back up there and click there. They can click right there. If you feel like that clogs up your site too much, particularly if I had put restrictions in for all of these things, there would then proceed to be a list of 5 things here, and it's going to really bog down the course site to some extent. I could instead, here in the settings about restrictions, let's come back to our restrict access, where I've set that. See that little eyeball? Do you want that concept, the idea that you have to have completed that? So displayed grayed out if user does not meet this condition. If instead I just hide it, then they don't even see the quiz at all, and it keeps things a little cleaner inside your site. You'll have to decide which is a more important way to use this in terms of keeping students guided through your materials. I would say for the most part, you're better off having them scroll a little bit too much, but be aware of exactly what they needed to have completed if you've limited access to something. So if I just needed them to have to scroll, they're done, and they have to scroll on past 4 or 5 more things to get down to the next week's worth of stuff. fine, because at least they know exactly what they needed to have completed. Let's say they had only completed 2 out of 5 of these things that I set as required. They would still see these restrictions visible because they would have had to have met all of them. I could set it, you can do or. You can do read this or this, and then you can get into the quiz on fertility. For the most part, in general, if the reading quiz covers 5 articles and you want to restrict access to the quiz based on having gone into those articles, you're going to need to go ahead and do that. There are pros and cons to using activity restriction to foster a flow within a Moodle site. One of the advantages is students get used to having to accomplish certain things before they move on to other things. It's particularly useful if you're using a mastery grading approach in which they have to have accomplished certain things, completed certain assignments, taken quizzes, other things like that before they can move on to subsequent material. On the other hand, it can make students a little frustrated if they feel like they should be able to just take the quiz. I want to just take the quiz. I read this article last year. Something like that. And probably the biggest drawback is that it does ultimately clutter up your site visually. I think that if a very particular sequence of action is critical to meeting your learning goals, then using activity completion and item restriction can be a valuable tool to help you in that process. If sequence is not as critical, then it might just be more clutter and more hassle than it's worth. If you are running into problems with students clearly not doing the readings, and there are other ways to tell if students have done the reading. You don't have to use item completion. You can use logs instead. If you proceed along with the semester and a third of the way in, it's pretty clear they're not reading, maybe then it's time to turn on item completion and make up a few things that help guide their process and encourage them a little more strongly to complete their readings, things along those lines. So that is, in a nutshell, item completion, item tracking, and restrictions based on item completion inside of Moodle.